look myself in the mirror and accept that if you weren't a racist, you condone what a racist did. So that's, to me, the same thing. It's the same thing. So
I agree with you completely.
Sounds to really make you rub and scrub. Swang badang badang bong biddly biddly bong. Bong biddly 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 bong. I said, pass the dutchie on the left hand side. Pass the dutchie on the left hand side. It a go bun.
Anthony, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I appreciate it.
You got a big show. You got a big following. So God bless you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Both of you, welcome to the show. I greatly appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, and good morning.
The floor is yours.
Whatever it is, it'll keep till the morning. Haven't we both got better things to do? Midnight blue.
I'm on your side, I still care. I may have died, but I've gone nowhere. Just think of me, I'll be there. Just think of me, I'll be there. There you go. Bit rusty.
Oh. You know what? I gotta tell you, usually I make my guests get a little emotional if I find something that touches them. You got me this time. So viewers, you're always telling me you got this one emotional. That got me emotional. I had to wipe my eyes.
No.
Since you told me you've seen some of the shows already, welcome, Johnny, of course. You know the running joke on my show is, because you're 6 hours ahead of me,
Oh, yeah.
I need the lottery numbers.
What do
But
you mean? These ones?
there you go. I love it.
I'm one step ahead of you, man.
Hey, folks, it's the man with the pinky ring and the New York thing. Forget about it. Bad Brad Berkwitt. And you're watching the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show on the Ringside Report web TV channel. Now, make sure you hit that button and you subscribe. Leave your comments below. Let's have a conversation. Love hearing from you. Now, today, all the way from the East Coast, an hour ahead of me in St. John, I have on a Democratic political commentator from CNN, and she also is the co-host of Hot Mics on the Left and Right with Alice Stewart, who I had on last week, if you remember. She is the one, the only, Maria Cardona. All right, everybody, I want to welcome you to the show, Maria, and I want to thank you for coming on, because I thought maybe at the last minute you would call me and tell me you couldn't because you were at Trump's second inauguration today.
I'm sure I was the first one on their invitation list, Brad.
Oh, Maron, forget about it. Okay, like I was saying, I always like to start at the beginning of a person's life, and then we'll move forward. And I don't mind saying on camera if something is wrong, because we know the internet isn't always correct.
Right, that's right. Imagine that.
Exactly. Feel free to say, hey, Brad, it's actually this. I'm not offended at all.
Sure.
All right. First of all, it looks like you were born in Bogota, Colombia. Is that correct?
Right. Yep.
Okay. And it looks like you left there at the age of about 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it looks like you moved to Ohio for a little while, and then more so Florida. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Tell me, what was it like when you got to Florida growing up around that time?
So that's a great question. Thank you, Brad. I don't remember much about Ohio. Obviously, I was super, super young. But the story that does stick in my mind is the reason we moved from Ohio to Florida is because my parents, having come from Bogota, had never experienced a winter the way that they did in Ohio. And after that very first winter, when my parents saw their very first snowfall and my dad went out to work in his, very fancy shoes that had no traction underneath, he didn't think that underneath the snow was a sheet of ice. So he went and he put his foot on the first stair and he slid and he cracked his head open.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, luckily he was okay. But the way that the story is told, he was cussing up a storm and he's like, I'm getting out of this GD place. We're moving to Florida.
okay.
And in fact, that's exactly what we did.
Okay, what, just out of curiosity, what part of Florida?
We ended up moving to a town in Central Florida called Leesburg.
Oh, okay.
Not, you know, not a whole lot of people have heard about it, but, you know, it has grown since then. Not much, but it has grown. It's about half an hour from Orlando.
Okay. Now, were your parents political when you were growing up?
Not at all. But what's interesting is that what I do remember is that when they first got here, they started voting Republican.
Okay.
They voted for Ford. They voted for Reagan both times. And I wasn't really political until I got to college, and then afterward, when I moved to DC. And then when I got appointed, I worked at the DNC in the 1990s, and then I got appointed to the Clinton administration.
Mm-hmm.
That's when my parents became Democrats because they, you know, were enamored and fell in love with Bill Clinton. I don't know if it had to do with the fact that I was working in the Clinton administration, or, you know, that they in fact really did believe in the policies. I now know that it was in fact because they did believe in the policies that the Clinton administration was pushing.
Okay. Now, you said college is when you got political. So who was like the first political, even if it was at a state level, the first political person that piqued your interest?
Well, when I got to college, that was sort of at the height of apartheid, I remember. And so that is what I started getting involved with. But it really wasn't until I moved here to DC and I started interviewing for jobs. I got really curious about the political process. I met folks who worked at the Democratic National Committee. They started talking to me about this groundbreaking pioneer of a new chairman named Ron Brown, who was the first African-American chairman of a major political party. And so I started sort of doing research on him. And then it turned out that there was a position open in the press shop of the DNC. They were looking for somebody to start reaching out to the Hispanic community with a Democratic message. It was the first time that the committee was doing anything like that in that formal of a way. It was a newly created position. And so I said to myself, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to really delve into politics using my background in public policy, which was what I had majored in at Duke.
You got me on the question. I was going to ask you that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I had majored at that at Duke University. And interestingly, when I signed up for that major, my father was like, what is that? Like, he had no idea what that was at the time. And then I also loved the opportunity, Brad, because it gave me it gave me a way to also use my language fluency in Spanish.
Okay.
And that was something that I really wanted to use because I know that it was a gift that my parents had fought for us. They did not speak any English at home. Even when we started speaking English to them, they would ignore us. So they essentially gave us the gift of a second language. And for me, it could not have come at a better time. I feel very strongly that having that ability opened many, many doors professionally for me. And it really gave me sort of the opportunity to look at two completely different worlds and find a way to integrate them together, both professionally and personally for me.
Okay. So I love people that do these type of shows because you just answered like 2-3 questions I can check off in that answer. And that's fantastic. I love that. Talking about Ron Brown, God rest his soul, I was devastated when he passed away. I had a lot of respect for him. Actually knew his son. Mike is his son, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Mike boxing, because I want to say, I don't know if he was the boxing commissioner. But
yes, you're right about that.
Yeah,
I forgot about that completely, yeah.
Yeah, I knew him back in the day. Since you talked a little bit about how you got into it with Ron Brown, for the viewers, if you would, one of your fondest memories of Ron Brown as a person.
Oh my goodness. So I have many of them, Brad, because he really was a groundbreaking, not just public official, but he's somebody who really brought the values that he was speaking about every single day on the stump and in speeches and at events. He really lived by those. And the stories that I remember from him are, for example, when we first came into the Department of Commerce, he was tapped to be the very first African-American Commerce Secretary by Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton won the election in '92. We went into the department, and then he brought me with him over to the department to help run the communications shop. Instead of going to meet the leadership of the department, all of the assistant secretaries, all of the undersecretaries, the first thing he wanted to do, Brad, was to go to the cafeteria, meet the workers, meet the janitorial staff, meet the people that he knew were the ones who were keeping the department running day and night.
Right.
And to this day, Brad, I kid you not, if I go to an event, for example, a commemoration of Ron's death, every year the Commerce Department has an event, I will run into people, civil servants who are still there from when we were there, and they still have the fondest memories of Ron, and they will tell me that they have never met a Commerce Secretary that made them feel more human, more needed, more a part of the team than he did. And to me, that is just an impeccable legacy.
That's when I always got that vibe when I saw him interview. Yep. I remember seeing his wife more frequently on TV. Is Mrs. Brown still alive?
No, Alma Brown, actually, this is an interesting story. She passed away, I believe it was in 2016. And the reason I remember that is because she passed away the same day, 20 years later, that Ron passed.
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
Wow.
And so that, to me, I mean, that's sort of spine tingling in a way, right? But, you know, she did everything she could to keep his legacy alive.
I remember seeing
scholarship programs in his name, you know, political training programs.
Classy lady.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. During that time, it looks like you led the communication, you were the lead communication strategist for the passage of Nafta in 1993. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. If you would, one thing that you think Nafta was the bomb on, and one thing that looking back, you wish that it would, that something that didn't go as you expected initially.
Right. I think NAFTA did a really good job at making the general public understand how connected we are to our neighbors to the north as well as our neighbors to the south. And that trade was front and center in a global economy, which is what we were fast becoming. And one of the things that I feel most proud of that we did at the Commerce Department was we lived that every day, right? With the passage of NAFTA, and I do think that it did some great things to expand trade. When you talk to Mexican economists, they will tell you that it was NAFTA that really ushered in a new era for the growth of the middle class in Mexico.
Okay.
And that was historic. You know, were there some downsides? Absolutely. And we saw some of those here in the United States. And so I think that, you know, now when trade agreements are looked at, NAFTA is a great model in terms of what to do right, as well as what to try to avoid in the future, right? But I think one of the biggest lessons of NAFTA for me was it really brought to life how integrated we were becoming. And one of the things that Ron Brown did at the Department of Commerce was he flew around the world in business development missions, taking with him American CEOs of companies and opening up markets for them, for their products and for their services, creating millions and millions of jobs under the Clinton administration, and because of the work that the Commerce Department was doing at the time, which was groundbreaking.
Okay.
And so, you know, NAFTA kind of led the way as the first of my era, of my generation, big free trade agreement that was talked about so often on the news and frankly in conversations of people who understood what was going on globally.
Okay. Looks like in 1997 you were awarded the Department of Commerce Silver Medal Award for Meritorious Federal Service, which I know is a huge honor. What was it like receiving that?
That was like you said, it was a huge honor, Brad. And you know, one of the things that I tried to do when I went in at the very beginning to do my job in helping to run the communication shop was to do what I saw Ron Brown did on a daily basis, which was to make people feel needed. And I got to tell you, it worked for me, and I needed it to work for me because I was going in there to do a job. I was a 24-year-old Latina, young Latina, who was going in to essentially on paper be the boss of white men who were more than twice my age at the time. So you can imagine, right? Right, the kind of reception I could have gotten if I had gone in there to be like, okay, people, this is how we're going to do it, right? But instead, what I did was what I saw Ron do each and every single day with different people at the department, which is to say, look, you all are the experts. You all need to teach me how you have done things, what has worked, what hasn't. I am going to guide you in terms of what the Clinton administration agenda is, what we need to get done here at the department, how I think is the best way to do it, but I can't do it without you. Okay. I need your input. I need your expertise. I need your experience, and you are an invaluable part of the team. If I succeed, you succeed. If Ron Brown succeeds, you succeed. If President Clinton succeeds, you succeed. Okay. And that to me was just such an incredibly important part of laying the foundation of a relationship of trust with, you know, the people that are going to work for you and with you. And they, you know, these are a group of people, like I said, there are some that are still there. Okay. These are a group of people who have, you know, seen political appointees and commerce secretaries and different administrations come and go. And they were going to be there when I came in. They were there when I came in. They were going to be there when I left, right? Okay. And so I needed their help, and I needed to have them on our team, and I needed for them to be invested in what we were doing. And thanks to the example that Ron set, I was able to do that. And all of that led to, obviously. That's right. And all of that led to, you know, some tremendous accomplishments, which were, you know, in no way, shape, or form were they mine alone. They were mine and my team's, and they were my team's because I was able to, you know, ensure that they knew how important they were and their work was. Well, see, we got something in common. I already adore you because I love people that, because I've been doing interviews for almost 30 years now, and I have people that I always tell them there's no I in we. Yeah. You know, and they forget that. I love the fact that you accomplish these things, but you talked about your team. Thank you. You're welcome. From 1998 to 2001, it looks like you were Director of Communications for United States Department of Justice, INS. What I want to talk to you about that is you were involved in Elian Gonzalez situation. Yeah. So, which it's funny because I had just told Deb the other day, I brought his name up and I said, I wonder what he was doing. And then when I was doing your research on you, I was like, oh, wow, okay. So biggest heartbreak for you with that case? The biggest heartbreak for me was when I saw the family that he was staying with in Miami put him on television, having clearly coached him to say the things that he said, to say that he didn't want to go back to Cuba, to say that he didn't want to be back with his father. And to me, that was just heart-wrenching because I knew this little boy had no idea what he was saying. He was afraid. He was being used by his family, by people who should have had his best interest at heart. And I think, Brad, I think they thought that they did have his best interest at heart, right? I will give them that because this was a fight that was so emotional for every single Cuban who had ever suffered at the hands of the Castro brothers, of Fidel Castro, right? Mm-hmm. So I get that, right? I understand that. You know, my parents told me nightmare stories of the dictatorship that they endured when they lived in Colombia when they were young. So the history of dictatorships in Latin America is nothing new for somebody, you know, right, from Latin America. You don't have had to have grown up in Cuba to understand that. Right. I get that. I understand that. And there is a lot of emotion still there. That's why you have still a very active and fiery Cuban community to this day who will never, ever, ever think about voting for a Democrat, right? Because
Right.
of what
Yeah.
they remember in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not to say that everything is fair game in a political agenda that clearly they had in front of them to use this child to bring forth or to embolden their political agenda. And to so many people, to the majority of the American people, that is exactly what they were doing.
Okay.
And so in my mind and in the mind of everyone who was working 24/7 on this case for this little boy, we were doing it from the standpoint of, what if we were in the shoes of the father, right? Who are we to say that his father has no right to bring him up in the political atmosphere that is Cuba, right? That's for his father to decide.
Right.
That is not for you to decide. That is not for me to decide. Because if then the US government starts getting into the business of deciding how parents should be raising their kids and in what country they should be raising their kids, and this is something that I learned while doing this, there are hundreds of children who have been taken from the United States to other countries by either their mother or their father. And back then, and I'm sure this is still the case today, they are in court in the process of trying to bring them back. And so if this case, if we had gone down the route of saying, oh, well, Elian belongs here because we don't want him growing up in communist Cuba, that would have dealt a death blow to so many parents who are fighting for their right to decide, not the government's right, for their right to decide how their kids should be brought up and where that child should be brought up. So we were fighting for the rights of the father.
Okay.
The mother had passed away en route when she brought Elian to the United States without the permission of the father. The father had no idea that this was happening until he got a call from the Cuban government saying that they had found Elian off the coast of Florida. And that's when all of this ensued, right?
Broke loose, yeah.
Exactly. So to me, that was the most heart-wrenching thing, to see how this little boy was being used as a pawn by his own family to further what to me was simply a political agenda.
Okay.
But luckily, it turned out great, right?
Yeah, I saw. I looked him up. It looks like he's doing good.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a kid, maybe.
Yeah, it was brutal the whole year that we had to fight. But then his father came over. We, we went into the Miami family's house.
Oh, I
literally guns a-blazing.
I know.
But happily, right? Everything turned out great. Elian was back in the arms of his dad. His father was very appreciative, but he did take him back to Miami. Everybody was saying, even the Miami
or to
family,
Cuba?
I'm sorry, to Cuba.
Yeah, right.
The Miami family was saying, you watch, when Elian's father gets here, he's going to ask for asylum because they are forcing him to bring Elian back. And so I got to tell you, Brad, I don't think, very many people know the story, but when he was here, the Attorney General, Janet Reno, at the time, had a meeting with him, and she demanded that his handlers not be in the meeting so that he could say, in all truthfulness and with comfort, that he would be taken care of and Elian would be taken care of if he wanted asylum here in the United States, right? His handlers weren't there. Nobody from the Cuban government was in that meeting. And he said that, no, thank you. He wants to bring Elian back to Cuba and raise him in Cuba.
Okay.
And so what more, right, can you hear from a father who's clearly not doing it under duress? And probably part of the understanding is that at that point he had become a national hero. You don't think he's going to have a fabulous life in Cuba after that,
Exactly.
And so in fact, if you looked him up, Elian did, he grew up.
I just saw him. I thought he was a little bit older. I think like 27, 20. But did he just have a kid? I thought I saw an article. Yeah,
absolutely. He's doing well.
Good.
We all talked about that perhaps he could be the very first president of Cuba, right? If their political maturity goes in the right direction.
Right. Okay, cool. I'm glad to hear that. About 2005, you signed on as a principal with the Dewey Group. Is that correct?
The Dewey Square Group, yes.
Dewey Square Group, right. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. So the Dewey Square Group is a firm that was founded in 1993 by a group of political operatives who had been working up until then on presidential campaigns, had been advisors to candidates and presidents, and understood that politics and its tactics were something that could really be brought to bear for other entities, whether that's corporations or nonprofit organizations or trade associations. But the tactics that we use in presidential campaigns to further a message, to convince people to vote for your candidate, to embark on an issue campaign to educate everyone about what it is that you want to be on the agenda and that you think is best for the country. All of those tactics could be used for corporations who were having to start to figure out how to navigate Washington.
Okay.
And so Dewey Square was kind of the first firm of its kind that did that. And they started through grassroots lobbying. And then it grew into having a communication shop. And then when I came on board, I started with a colleague of mine, the multicultural practice, you know, having done so much work in the Latino community and understanding the growth of that community and the growth of the multicultural community in the country, and how so many corporations and candidates and entities were going to have to understand what these demographic changes meant to their bottom line and to how they did business. That is what I was able to bring to Dewey Square, and I've loved every single minute of it. My principals, my colleagues there, as well as my staff, they're like my family. I've had 2 kids since I've been there, and I still work for them to this day. And through that work, I was able to work on both of Hillary Clinton's campaigns, to help the Obama campaign as well. I became a television commentator, doing a bunch of television. You know, at first it was for every network in English and in Spanish, through Obama's first presidential campaign. And then I was lucky enough to get signed exclusively by CNN. And that is where I am still to this day.
Okay. I want you to put on, like I told Alice, you're the SME now. In the Navy, a SME is subject matter expert. So you're going to be the SME for this part.
I like that, SME. Okay.
There you go. It's a Navy term, and probably military. So from all your years, I want to talk about the Republican Party now. From all your years around politics, what do you think right now with this BS, with this still, the election was rigged, all of this crap, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Lauren Boeberts, it's just the insanity that you talked about. Your parents voted for Reagan back in the day. President Reagan has turned over in his grave, in my opinion,
several
looking at
times.
what's going on, because this isn't even politics. But what I want to ask you, the first question I want to ask you is, how toxic is the House right now in the Senate for people working here? I mean, I would make an assumption it's horrible, but I want to hear from you. What do you think?
I think, Brad, it's as toxic as we have seen it perhaps since the Civil War era.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is because I've talked to many of these members who are heartsick that they have to go to work with colleagues whom they know were part of pushing the big conspiracy, the big lie that led to riots on January 6th that put their lives in danger. How do you go to work and sit beside somebody that you know put your own life in danger?
And still.
And still many of them are still pushing that big lie, right? Many of them at that point, that was sort of, they realized what was going on. They're like, okay, I don't want to have any part of it. But way too many of them went back into the fold, even though they might have said something the day of, like Lindsey Graham and, you know, Mitch McConnell, even though they praise him for having said what he said on the floor. Come on, right?
It's BS.
Yes, it's BS because, you know,
too.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. Don't get me started on Cruz. And I tease Alice because, you know, we did our podcast today. As you know, we have a podcast together. And I always tell her, I was like, I'm sorry, but your boss is part of the problem,
He's
right?
an arrogant, you know what? And I you know,
he's a traitor to the country is what he is.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very toxic, as toxic as we've ever seen it.
Okay.
There's a lot of work to be done. I hope we can get to the point where, you know, members of Congress don't feel like their lives are in danger when they go to work, or that their colleagues somehow wish them ill. But when you have to go to work in the same chamber as somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the other Laura lady,
Boebert, yep.
thank you, from Colorado, how can you put on a, you know, put on sort of your hat of what you're supposed to be doing as a member of Congress to stand up for the Constitution and to stand up for democracy, when you know that there are members of Congress who believe in the QAnon conspiracy?
I know.
That's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's like, think about when we were in high school, when you had the tables in the cafeteria and somebody wanted to come and sit there and you're like, I don't want to sit with him. I mean, if I was in there, if Cruz came to the table, he wouldn't be able to come within 10 feet of the table, because I think he's a traitor, a liar, and many other things. But you had mentioned earlier, and I'm glad you talked about why a lot of people in the Cuban community will never vote Democrat. But that's another question I want to ask you from a Hispanic perspective. So in 2015, and if you don't know, and I don't pull no punches. I don't despise Trump. I hate Trump. I hate what he did to this country. I was in the military for 20 years and 28 days. I hate how he treated the military with his loser and suckers thing, which I absolutely believe he said. I hate his racism, okay? And everything about him, I despise him. It's not policies, it's evil.
Right.
But what I want to ask you from a Hispanic perspective, that SOB came down that escalator. I don't put words in people's mouths, and said, Mexicans are rapists and I think murderers, but I'm sure some of them are okay, or something to that effect.
Oh, yeah.
I understand policies. Actually, I have no problem with a healthy debate over policies, but I do have a problem with an outright racist, misogynist, who doesn't respect women. He especially hates women of color, but he doesn't respect any women, but women of color definitely feel his wrath. He comes on the escalator, he says that to the world. Now, I understand policies. The one thing that I've heard from Hispanic people that I know that voted for President Biden but have family members that didn't is one big issue, and you correct me if I'm wrong, with them is the pro-life thing, that the Republican Party stance is pro-life. Though I can't believe that they think that this man, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to say it. I'm sure he paid for several abortions in his lifetime, and he probably NDA'd the hell out of those women like he does everybody in his orbit with NDAs. If people watching don't know what NDA is, a non-disclosure agreement. So I get the pro-life stance of the Republican Party, though I think a lot of them are full of it. But okay, let's just give them that. That's their life. The Democratic Party is more pro-choice. Taking that away, the pro-life thing, why were there still, and I say this too about the African-American community too. You knew he was a racist from the Central Park 5 to putting C on applications for that. I get you want certain policies. You know, even if you hold your nose and voted for Hillary or for President Biden, or you said, you know what, I'm writing John Kasich in, whatever.
Right.
How people still within the Hispanic community, whatever that number is, and I don't know it, but I know it was a decent number, how do they still vote for a man that said that?
Brad, you know, that is the $64 million question, right? I've asked myself that question because I don't understand how somebody that is of Hispanic descent, with the way that he has treated, and it's not just Latinos or immigrants, but like you said, every person of color,
Yes.
Muslims,
Yes.
women,
Yes.
Anybody who is not an old white man, essentially.
And he even treats them badly, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Which is kind of insane because he does also treat them badly, because I just think he is a horrible human being.
Yes.
That gives Republicans the talking point to say, oh, he treats everybody like that. He's not a racist because he treats everybody like that. You know, that's BS. We do know that he's a racist. But the Latino question is an important one, because it's one that I have been, you know, diving into along with my colleagues and activists in the Hispanic community, as to why there still remains a small segment, and it is small, but it is still a segment of the Latino population who will vote for Trump. And what we saw this past election cycle, there were a record number of Latinos who came to the polls, and there were a record number of Latinos who voted for Joe Biden. There's no question about that. But there are two places where it was very disappointing that Trump was able to not necessarily do better, but he did not do as badly as he should have with Latinos. And that's in Florida.
Yes.
And in Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And the reason why that happened, and I will address the pro-life, pro-choice issue here in a second.
Okay.
The reason why he was able to win in places in Florida where he shouldn't have, as well as in the Texas Rio Grande Valley, is because they ran a multi-year, incredibly aggressive, permeating misinformation campaign.
I heard about that.
About how Democrats and Joe Biden were dangerous socialists,
yes,
radicals, and liberals, right? That would bring on an era of fascism.
Yep.
And in places like Florida, because of what we talked about, right? The Cuban vote, a lot of folks from, Latin America and from Central America just bought into that. They literally, bought into that big lie. There were several big lies that were making the rounds this election cycle. That was one that way too many Latinos bought into. And the same thing happened in the Rio Grande Valley.
Okay.
So that I think is on us. The Democrats need to do a better job of combating that kind of misinformation and disinformation, especially in Spanish language media, Brad, because that is how they were kind of able to get away with it under the radar. And so now that we know what's up, we need to do a much better job of combating that starting now, frankly.
Okay.
To make sure that is not a message that that is credible or that gets through the way that it did in November. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the issue of pro-life versus pro-choice, because this is something that has been perpetrated and pushed forward by Hispanics. Republican Hispanics, as well as Republicans in general, right? They talk about the Hispanic community, and Ronald Reagan famously said, all Latinos are Republicans, they just don't know it yet, right? And the reason he said that is because of this belief that Latinos are, for the most part, more conservative and more family-oriented than mainstream Americans. Now, I will say that could be true when it comes to, issues of family. Yes, our family is the most important thing, and issues revolve around our extended family. When it comes to pro-choice versus pro-life, that is also, you could say that for some Latinos, that could have been the deciding factor, but that's not the case for most Latinos, Brad, and I'll tell you why. The same way that issue has moved in polling in mainstream America, that issue has moved in polling, not just in the Latino community, but also in the African American community. Maybe 20 years ago, if you had asked, whether most people were pro-choice or pro-life, most people would have said pro-life in the Hispanic community. Today, that number is on par with what it is in mainstream America. The issue with Latinos is this is a very private issue that should not have, in any way, shape, or form, should not involve the government. And that is why we've also seen in polling that a very small number of Latinos actually have ever voted on that issue per se.
Gotcha.
So that whoever tells you that, just say, you know what, actually that's not right.
Okay.
Because polling shows it. Now that doesn't mean, again, like I said, that, are there a good number of Latinos who are pro-life? Sure, but they don't use that as an issue, a number one issue for them to make a decision on elections. They care more about what are you going to do for their family? What are you going to do to be able for them to give their kids a better life? Because that's the reason why we all came to this country in the first place, right? It wasn't because we wanted the government to push pro-life policies. No, that's everyone's personal decision. That's, up to you and your God and your family.
Right.
And the reason I came to this country with my parents, the reason my dad made the decision, the hard decision, it's not an easy decision to make, as you know, to leave everything behind and leave everyone you love behind and go to a country where you know no one, where many times you don't know the language and where many people are not educated. But you know that in this country, or at least you hope that in this country, the values that you have heard are the ones that you are going to be able to live by. If you work hard and play by the rules, you will be able to give yourself, but more importantly, your children, better opportunities than what you had.
Okay.
And that's the reason why most Latinos and most immigrants come to this country.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And I'm glad we're recording it so people can hear it. I'm going to ask you a question I've never asked anybody before we segue into the random fun questions. So are you a Twilight Zone fan by chance?
I love the Twilight Zone, yes.
Okay, good deal. So I'm putting you in the Twilight Zone for 48 hours.
Okay.
Okay, so you ready for this question?
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, you wake up tomorrow morning and you're in the Twilight Zone and you're a Republican. Who would you be if you had the choice of a Republican at any time in history, and you got to be one for 48 hours?
Of any time in history?
Yeah, it could be any. It doesn't have to be a current Republican because you can't find many you like. Over the whole history, but you got to be one in the Twilight Zone for 48 hours. Who are you going to be?
Well, if I could be anyone in history, I think in terms of what I would want my legacy to be, I would be Abraham Lincoln.
I knew you was going to pick Lincoln.
Yeah, I would be Abraham Lincoln. But you know what's interesting and what I love about Lincoln's history that is coming to light in a way that I think it hasn't up until now. There are so many people writing books about Lincoln, and you know, there's the new series on CNN about Lincoln and the movie about Lincoln several years ago.
Yep, Daniel Day-Lewis, yep.
Exactly, which was terrific.
Yes, it was.
But, you know, Lincoln was not a perfect person.
Far
There is
from
no
it.
perfect person, right? Far from it. He wasn't even necessarily somebody who was ready to stand up and say slavery should be no more, right? But he did, when history called, he made the right decisions at the right time, for the right reasons, right? They might not have been the perfect reasons and the overall sort of halo that we put on Lincoln, right? That it was completely anti-slavery and he was the, you know, the messiah for the African-Americans who were enslaved and all of that. It's not that cut and dry, right? And he was certainly not a saint when it came to that, but he made the decisions and put the pillars in place that led to emancipation, that led to, you know, the ending of slavery.
He rose to the occasion, something that Trump never did. He rose to the occasion.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
That's exactly right.
All right, what I want to do is I want to segue into the fun questions. There's no right or wrong answers. They're random. They're almost like rapid fire. First one, favorite genre of movies?
Oh my goodness. I love sci-fi. And I love action movies, I have to say.
Okay.
and you know, my husband will always say, like, he'll always make fun of me. Like if a new Terminator comes out, he's like, okay, sweetheart, I'll go see this with you. Cause he'll know that I will be dying to go see the new Terminator movie.
Okay.
Cause that's like action and sci-fi.
Sci-fi, you got the combination there. Okay.
Exactly.
Your favorite go-to movie that you could watch more than once?
Oh my goodness. I have to say that every time that it's on, I don't mind watching it all the way through. A Few Good Men.
Okay. All right. You see that flag behind me, the one right here?
Yeah.
That was flown over the real Guantanamo Bay when I was stationed there, not the Jack Nicholson.
Wow.
Not the Jack Nicholson one, fake one. But that's a good movie. That's a good movie. Okay.
Wow.
Favorite actor?
Favorite actor. I love Diego Luna.
Okay.
Who has played some great characters, some
I know.
great characters. And, you know, I had to choose a Latino actor, right? Or a Latina, I could have chosen too. There's such tremendous talent in the Latino community. And, you know, that's one of the things that I'm seeing more and more of now, like on Netflix series. There are so many series that are focused on bringing up Latino talent, but there is still so much more to do in that space.
Okay. Now flip it. Favorite actress?
Favorite actress. Wow. I'm going to go with another Latina. I'm going to go with Michelle Rodriguez.
Okay.
I think she's underrated. I
Okay.
think she has a tremendous ability, and I think they should use her more. But in every single movie that I have seen her in, I've loved her. And one of the most underrated movies that she's been in is called Girl Fight.
Oh yeah. I know. Mhm.
And it's about boxing,
Right.
actually,
That's my thing.
as you know.
Yep.
And so I think she was terrific, and I hope that she gets the opportunities to play bigger and broader and bolder roles.
Okay. Favorite, I bet you, I know what genre you're going to pick this in. Favorite male singer?
Wow, male singer. That's a good, well, okay. If I'm going to be true to my roots and to how I grew up, I'm going to have to go with Michael Jackson.
Okay. All right.
Because he, I'm a child of the 80s.
Mhm.
And me and my friends had crushes on Michael Jackson, and I
Okay.
know that people think that he's done things, but there was no question that he was a trailblazer and a talent like we've never seen before. And I think that is what his legacy is, and his songs will certainly live on in history.
Okay. Now flip that. Favorite female singer?
Female singer. I'm gonna go with Beyonce.
Okay.
Because of what she, I think, has represented in terms of also, breaking barriers for women of color, what she's been able to do through her songs, what she's been able to portray. She's become more political as well. And, that's something that I always admire.
Okay. What is your favorite noise or sound that you like to hear?
Not necessarily music.
No, just the sound. Anything?
Rainfall.
Okay.
Which is interesting because I don't necessarily like rain in and of itself. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and so sun and the beach and all of that is sort of it's in my DNA.
Okay.
But at night I have a noise machine, and I always put on the rain.
Okay.
And it calms me. It kind of helps me meditate. It helps put me to sleep. And so,
Okay.
And my husband is from Oregon. And he loves the rain. And so maybe there's something there as to how the rain brought us together.
Now, see, that's interesting. Where you're from, and he's from Oregon. I'm from New York, and Debbie's from Louisiana. So you can imagine the two of us talking.
There you go.
Like,
Opposites attract, maybe.
Okay. So flip that. What's your least favorite noise or sound?
Oh my goodness. My least favorait sound. Nails on a chalkboard. Fingernails on a chalkboard. Yeah. And I it's funny because there are now sometimes certain people's voices.
Oh, I know where you're going with that.
That I have equated to that. And I literally have, I came to the point where I had the same reaction when I heard that person's voice that I do when I hear nails on a chalkboard.
Okay. I do too. If you were to hit the lottery tomorrow for the $200, $300, $400 million, what would be the first thing you would do?
The first thing I would do is take care of my parents.
Okay.
And then I would go to, there are several causes that I have worked for throughout my life that I, believe in with my whole heart and soul. And taking care of undocumented immigrants is one of them.
Okay.
And what I mean by taking care of them, and I know, a lot of people on the other side of the aisle think that is not something that the United States should be doing. But I say that because, especially in the era of Trump, we saw so many families that suffered at the hands of his draconian, inhumane immigration policies. Kids that to this day have been separated from their parents and will probably grow up without knowing who their parents were. And to me, that is just nothing less than criminal. And so I would give money to the organizations, or I would, go and try to work on this directly myself to the organizations who are trying to reunite those kids with their parents. and who are doing the important work of ensuring that when migrants come to this country on our border, that they understand that they have a right to make a claim for asylum, that they have a right to try and stay here legally, because the only thing that these families are doing, Brad, is out of desperation, out of love for their own children, they are looking for an opportunity to build a better life. They're not looking for a handout. They're not looking, to live on the government teat, if you will. They want to work hard. They want to work hard, and they want to give their children opportunities that they know that back home they would never, ever have.
Okay.
So if I am ever able to, run across that kind of money, whether I make it or I win it, I do want to put that money to work in a way that will help migrants, that will help the country understand how important immigrant work is to this country. I don't know if you have heard of a movie, it's several years old now, but it's called A Day Without a Mexican. And it was a movie that was made, talk about the Twilight Zone. Brad, if you were in the Twilight Zone and tomorrow you woke up in a country where every single undocumented immigrant was gone, the economy would collapse.
Yeah.
The economy would collapse. And when nativists come out and, say these horrible things about undocumented immigrants, they simply don't understand the kind of contributions that immigrants have made to this country. And so, again, I would put my money to trying to restore that kind of American value that I know the Biden administration is trying to do.
Okay.
But I feel like in these last 4 years, our country was so stripped of our values, of our humanity, and of our civility that, I would invest a lot of money to try to get that back.
Okay. If you could meet one person from any time in history, dead or alive, who would you like to meet, and what would your first question be for him?
I am now sort of in the in the process of becoming a lot more familiar with the man who liberated my home country, Colombia. There's a terrific Netflix series called Bolivar.
Okay.
And so I would love to get to know Simon Bolivar. But even more so, I would love to get to know the woman who became his lifelong companion. They were never married, so it wasn't his wife, but for all intents and purposes, his wife.
Okay.
A woman by the name of Manuelita Saenz. And I would love to get to know both of them, but probably more so her, because if it wasn't for her, he never would have survived. And if he hadn't have survived, there wouldn't have been all these countries liberated. And so again, you see, a great man would never be as great without the woman in his life. And so I would love to meet her. She was a firecracker, a firebrand. She was brilliant. She was strategic. She was whip smart. And, as so many women, as well as in American history have been too, right? That have not gotten the recognition that they deserve. But that's who I would want to meet.
Okay. With everything we discussed so far, Maria, if you had to sum up yourself in 1, 2, or 3 thoughts as a human being, what would you say?
I would like to think that I am somebody who tries to put myself in other people's shoes so as not to judge immediately or harshly. I also know that, people are more complicated than just what talking points might lead us to believe, which is why I really believe that we need to get back to the kind of civility and humanity and being able to have a conversation with somebody you don't necessarily agree with. I want to think of myself as somebody who has championed that. And as you know, in that vein, that's why Alice Stewart and myself started the podcast that we did called Hot Mics from Left to Right, because we are probably, you know, are left and right, in terms of what we believe in, diametrically opposed almost on every single policy issue.
Mm-hmm.
But we're very good friends. We adore each other. We get along. And I think that is one of
you know what? Not to cut you off because we got,
Yeah.
I know a little time. With Alice, there's humanity there. And when, you know, I had her on my show and we're complete opposites too. And she voted
Right.
for Trump in 2020.
Right.
I couldn't vote for him either time. But okay, with that said, so many people have hit me up on that show and said what you said in your answer about civility. We had a conversation, but like I told Alice, I can disagree or agree to disagree with Alice, but she's not a QAnon nut. She also, after the insurrection, wouldn't support Trump again. That was her bridge too far. Everybody has their bridge too far. So
Right.
she is somebody that, you know, I see her get attacked on, because we all do, on Twitter for our views. But okay, that's social media. But she's got humanity, and I think that's where you probably find your biggest common ground, though you're on opposite ends of the spectrum.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right, Brad. And I think that is an important value
Mhm.
that we've lost as a country.
Yes.
And I think that we have to lead with that now, front and center. And frankly, I got to tell you, Brad, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Biden won.
I do too.
He put that front and center,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
He
Well,
put
that and I think COVID. I think if Trump
yes, no
if
question about that.
Trump would have done 10% of COVID, just 10%,
Right.
he would have won again. I
Yeah.
really do. He would have won, which is insane to me.
I know.
But he couldn't get that right. When I bring you on another show, we have more time. We can go into a whole bunch of other topics.
Right.
Okay. So out of that answer, which I hear it from your thing, you got a lot of empathy, humanity, and I think that came across in the interview as well. And because we're running out of time, the other thing I want to ask you is, you've done a lot of interviews over the years. Is there one question that you've never been asked, either by me or anybody else, that you said, you know, I wish I was asked this question? And if so, what is the question? What is the answer?
You know, I get asked, not on these kinds of interviews, but I get asked I used to get asked in job interviews, right? When you were sort of up and coming, you would get asked the question of, you know, what would you tell a younger Maria Cardona, you know, in terms of a piece of advice that you wish you had gotten when you were younger, right? And it's interesting because that's an interview question, right? But I've never, that's a job interview question. I've never gotten that interview question in an interview like this. And I like it because it also sort of makes you think, how have you changed, right? How have you grown? And how are you different now than you were 20 years ago, when you were first starting sort of in the job market, if you will? And I guess what I would tell my younger self is that, you know, don't sweat the small stuff, right? That you have that to be strong and unmoving in your core values. And that if you have a true north, that is going to guide you at every step of the way. One of the biggest lessons that I have learned, Brad, and we didn't really talk about this, it is that when Ron Brown's plane went down in 1996, and he perished along with everyone else who was on the plane with him, my immediate boss in the Commerce Department press and communication shop was on that plane. She was the press secretary. I was the deputy press secretary. So when that happened,
you had to step up.
Exactly.
Yeah, I saw that in your bio. I saw that.
I had to step up. And if you had asked me the day before, hey, Maria, do you think you're ready to lead the comm shop for the Commerce Department? I would have said no way, that I would needed at least 2 or 3 more years under my belt to get the kind of experience I would need to lead it. I was leading it the very next day. And so what I would say to my younger self is, you are capable of so much more than you think you are.
Okay.
You just have to always be ready to step up. You have to be brave, what some people call fearless, but I don't necessarily like the word fearless because it's okay to have fear.
Mhm.
But what you don't want to do is to have that fear overcome you and keep you from doing the things either you want to do or that need to be done.
Okay.
And that, I think, frankly, is the biggest lesson that Republicans can learn today.
Okay.
Because they are capital C cowards. And that's why this country is going through some of the most difficult times they are.
Okay. And last question I always close out on is, finally, what is the saying you live your life by if you have one?
I mean, frankly, the saying is treat others the way that you would have them treat you.
Old school. That's old
Very
school.
simple.
Yeah, very
It's
simple.
very old school. But you know what? It's also, that's why they call it the golden rule, because it's golden. And, many times, even if you treat people, super nice and you treat them great, they might not treat you that way. But then guess what? That's on them. It's not on you.
Okay.
And most of the time you will find, there are a lot of cynical people, and especially here in DC, but I also like to think that I have more faith in people's goodness than in their ability to, or tendency to take advantage of others.
Okay.
Sometimes, my husband thinks I'm a little naive when it comes to that, but I try to have faith in people's humanity.
Okay.
Even today.
Okay. And for my viewers, tell them how they can find you social media wise, your platforms and stuff.
Thank you. I can be reached on Twitter at Maria T. Cardona, on Instagram, Maria Cardona DC, and the practice area that I run at Dewey Square is called Latinovations, and that can be reached at www.latinovations.com.
Okay. Well, I got to give a shout out to your assistant, Karen, for setting this up. I appreciate it. I always love giving people
fabulous.
credit.
Thank
She's
you,
fabulous.
Karen Castillo. She is a star. Love her.
Yep. I saw her. I actually saw her on your website because it's got all the pictures for
Yeah.
Dewey Square.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you for coming on. You got access to me now, like I told Allison. Every guest that I have on is special for a different reason. You got access to me now. I'll send you. This show will be up later on today, and I'll send you a link. You got something going on, or you got a book coming out, or whatever. Or
our podcast. You can help us promote our podcast.
Oh, I'm going to talk to Alice offline about that. I already talked to her.
Fantastic.
But and also plug that because you mentioned it, but tell them again where to find that. Your podcast.
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, Alice and I have started a podcast that is called Hot Mics from Left to Right. And essentially the mission is to have very passionate, intellectually driven, data-driven, but also passion-driven conversations about politics, about policy, but to do it with decency and civility and friendship, which is what we both really feel about each other.
And
so
you can find it on Apple.
Yes, you can do it. You can find it on all of the platforms that now are streaming podcasts. So thank you for that, Brad. I appreciate that plug.
Absolutely. All right, well, you take care on the East Coast. Be safe.
Thank you so much, Brad. It was a pleasure to be on your show. I love the conversations that you have. You really try to delve in and get to know people for who they are, not just on, what they might seem on television or social media. So thank you for doing that. That's an important thing to do, to really get to know people. So I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another episode of the Bad Brad Berkwitt Show in a can. That time with CNN Democratic political commentator Maria Cardona. Another great conversation. I'm truly, truly enjoying. If anything came out of COVID that was positive, at least for me, was having Marielle Trump tell me, hey, Brad, you should do Zoom interviews. So I appreciate your friend for saying that, because you definitely steered me in the right direction all those months ago when we did ours. So I'm able to talk to Maria today. What a brilliant, compassionate, smart lady. Women should be running the world. I don't care what you men say. Women should be running the world. And hopefully one day we'll have a female president. But that's another one in the can. As we always say, forget about it. Make sure you subscribe. Leave your comments below. Let's have a conversation. Appreciate each and every one of my viewers. And on that note, forget about it. And remember, folks, every act of kindness is a little love we leave behind. Bad Brad out.